We're so often on the hunt for these, like, dazzlingly complex answers, aren't we?
Yeah.
These intricate strategies to, navigate life. But what if the most powerful insights are actually the simple, enduring truths we sometimes overlook?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to unpack a really fascinating collection of reflections on, well, the fundamental aspects of life and decision-making.
Exactly.
Think of this as your kind of express route to feeling truly informed about some bedrock principles, without getting bogged down in endless data.
Exactly. Our aim is really to distill those crucial nuggets of wisdom, those aha moments that suddenly illuminate things that help us better understand the world and, well, our place within it.
Yeah.
The material we're exploring today, it touches on, gosh, everything from the surprising impact of totally unforeseen events
Wow.
to the often unexpected ways progress actually happens and the pivotal role our own expectations play in our sense of well-being.
Okay, let's dive in then. We've got some really compelling examples lined up.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine how, like, a subtle shift in wind direction during the Revolutionary War could have altered history.
Wow.
Or how a single functioning boiler room on the Lusitania might have prevented a catastrophe. We'll also be looking at the counterintuitive surge in productivity during the depths of the Great Depression.
Which seems crazy, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And the cautionary tale of a titan like Sears losing its dominant position.
Yeah.
It's all about spotting those recurring patterns, those fundamental forces at play, as one of our sources puts it.
Precisely. And we're not just looking at these in isolation, are we?
No.
Our goal is to connect these seemingly disparate examples to some core aspects of, human psychology and broader historical trends.
Right.
We want to help you see the underlying mechanisms at work. Those things that, as one of our sources aptly notes, remain remarkably consistent across time.
So let's get straight to it.
Yeah.
One of the most striking themes that just leaps out from our sources is the sheer unpredictable power of the unexpected. It almost sounds trite, I know, but the truly massive world-altering events are so often the things that catch us completely off guard.
And what's particularly interesting here is how our natural inclination is to, focus on and prepare for the risks we can readily envision.
The ones we can name.
Exactly. But what the sources consistently highlight is that the real disruptors, the true game changers, they're the surprises, the events that barely register on anyone's radar until, bam, they suddenly arrive.
It reminds me of that story about Warren Buffett having lunch during the 2009 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah.
Everything felt like it was teetering on the brink, right? And he asks his companion if he knew what the best-selling candy bar was back in 1962.
Okay. Where's this going?
The answer, Snickers.
Snickers.
Yeah. It's a simple, yet I think profound illustration that even amidst immense upheaval, some fundamental human preferences and behaviors just endure.
That's a great example of the stickiness, of certain aspects of human nature. But then you have these stark reminders of how swiftly and tragically the unforeseen can strike.
Yeah.
The account in our sources of the skiing accident involving Brendan and Brian, despite their experience and what appeared to be sound precautions, it just underscores how rapidly unforeseen dangers can materialize.
Even when you think you've done everything right.
Exactly. Even when we feel we've taken reasonable steps.
It's a sobering reminder of our vulnerability.
Yeah.
They were seasoned skiers, yet that day, the unpredictable happened.
Mm-hmm.
And when you zoom out and look at history on a grand scale, the impact of these tiny, unforeseen factors becomes even more astonishing. Consider the wind direction for the British fleet during a crucial night in the Revolutionary War.
Right.
As historian David McCullough has pointed out, a different wind that night could have fundamentally changed the outcome of the entire war.
That's a powerful illustration of how seemingly insignificant details can have just enormous consequences. These weren't failures of grand strategy. It was something as elemental as the wind. Similarly, think about the tragedy of the Lusitania. If that fourth boiler room had been fully operational, the ship might have arrived in Liverpool a full day earlier.
Whole day.
A whole day, potentially completely avoiding the German U-boat. A seemingly minor technical issue.
Yeah.
With the potential to alter the trajectory of World War I. Just, wow.
Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Our source quotes Carl Richards, a noted expert in behavioral finance, who said, "Risk is what's left over after you think you've thought of everything."
Ooh, that's good.
That really resonates, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's often not the risks we meticulously plan for that ultimately get us,
Right.
but those we haven't even imagined.
Precisely. And this isn't meant as a criticism of planning or forecasting,
No, of course not.
Our source points out that even highly respected publications like The Economist, in their annual year-ahead predictions, they failed to foresee major events like COVID-19 or the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, huge misses.
Huge. But this isn't necessarily a failing of those specific forecasts, right? It's more an illustration of the inherent challenge in predicting truly novel events, things that haven't happened before.
And then there's that tricky human tendency to be completely taken in by hindsight.
Oh, definitely. Hindsight bias.
Yeah. After an event occurs, it can all seem so clear, so inevitable.
Like, oh, of course that happened.
Exactly. But for the people living through it, in the moment, it was anything but certain. Our source suggests we might be too quick to assume that people in the past were just blind or mistaken, and not appreciating enough how much our understanding is shaped by knowing what happened next.
That's a crucial insight into how we interpret history and, frankly, how we try to anticipate the future. We construct these neat logical narratives after the fact.
Tidy stories.
Exactly. Drawing connections that weren't at all obvious at the time. The anecdote about Houdini, the ultimate escape artist,
Right.
who could meticulously plan for and overcome incredible physical challenges, it really drives this home.
How's
He was ultimately undone by a completely unprepared for punch to the stomach.
No way.
Yeah. It wasn't the grand elaborate trap he couldn't escape. It was the small, unforeseen blow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to see the profound impact of the unexpected. But another really powerful theme in our sources is how our satisfaction, our overall sense of well-being, is so often determined not by our absolute circumstances,
Right.
but by our expectations relative to those circumstances.
What's fascinating here is the inherent relativity of contentment. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner,
Yep.
he's often observed that the world is driven by envy, not just pure greed.
Envy. Interesting.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
constantly making comparisons, right? And those comparisons heavily influence how we perceive our own situation.
Think about it. Our source uses the example of America in the 1950s.
Okay.
By today's material standards, living conditions were arguably quite a bit lower. Houses were smaller.
Sure.
A larger proportion of income went to food. Yet there seemed to be this prevailing sense of optimism. Median hourly wages, adjusted for inflation, are significantly higher today than in 1955. But does that automatically equate to a proportionally greater level of overall satisfaction for most people?
Not necessarily, right? Because our expectations have also risen dramatically.
Ah.
Things that were once considered luxuries or, unimaginable conveniences have become perceived as necessities.
Like smartphones or...
Exactly. This is where those powerful anecdotes from our sources, like the Ferencz family, Holocaust survivors who found deep joy in the simplest things,
Incorrect.
or the friend from Africa is still marveling at the sheer abundance of food in America, become so illuminating. Their past experiences have shaped their present expectations in ways that many of us who haven't faced such stark realities might not fully appreciate.
It really forces you to reevaluate your own perspective.
Totally.
And it's not just about historical comparisons. Even within a single individual's life, expectations can rapidly adjust. Will Smith's reflection on his experience with fame.
Right, I remember reading that.
Initially incredible, then a mixed bag, then even miserable when the sense of it fades. It just shows how quickly our baseline can shift.
Yeah. And Naomi Osaka's comments about winning major tennis tournaments feeling more like a relief than pure joy.
That was striking.
It really highlights how even extraordinary achievements can become normalized within our own minds.
So we just get used to things.
That's the phenomenon psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. We adapt to new circumstances, good or bad, and our expectations tend to rise in tandem.
So you're always chasing.
It often leaves us in a constant state of striving just to maintain a certain level of satisfaction. The example of Harry Truman is also telling.
How so?
Initially, he was almost universally viewed as unprepared for the presidency, right?
Yeah, accidental president.
But his performance over time significantly exceeded those low expectations, ultimately leading to a very high ranking among historians. Expectations were low, performance was high.
Which brings us to Charlie Munger's perhaps surprisingly simple prescription for a happier life.
Which is?
Cultivate low expectations.
Huh. It might sound a little cynical on the surface, maybe.
Maybe. But the underlying wisdom seems to be about creating a greater buffer between what we anticipate and what actually occurs.
Exactly. If your expectations are constantly outpacing your reality, you're essentially setting yourself up for perpetual dissatisfaction,
Makes sense.
even if your objective circumstances are steadily improving.
Now, let's shift our focus a bit to another intriguing idea from our sources. The double-edged sword of truly unique minds.
Ooh, I like this one.
This is the notion that individuals with exceptionally rare talents or ways of thinking often possess other traits that might be less, well, conventionally desirable or even quite unconventional.
What's so interesting about this is the apparent interconnectedness of these characteristics. It's as if you often can't isolate the brilliance from the eccentricities, for lack of a better term.
Right.
The example of Eliud Kipchoge, the remarkable marathon runner, just sitting in silence for extended periods before receiving his Olympic medal.
While everyone else is on their phones.
Exactly. While his fellow athletes were engrossed in social media, it really illustrates this almost singular focus.
It's that intense concentration, that almost obsessive dedication that likely contributes significantly to his extraordinary success, but it's also not how most of us typically function.
Not at all. And then you have someone like John Boyd, the fighter pilot.
Ah, yes.
Brilliant, a true visionary in his field, but by many accounts, a remarkably difficult personality, abrasive, unpredictable, often insubordinate.
His story perfectly embodies this concept, doesn't it?
Totally. The Air Force desperately needed his innovative thinking, his revolutionary insights into aerial combat, yet they often found his personality almost unbearable.
So you need the insight, but you get the personality too.
His unique perspective, the very lens through which he viewed air-to-air warfare, seemed inseparable from his challenging demeanor. He was, in essence, a package deal.
He even goes back to intellectual giants from history.
Yeah.
John Maynard Keynes, the renowned economist, was reportedly quite surprised to discover the sheer volume of Isaac Newton's work dedicated to alchemy and mystical pursuits.
Right. Areas we don't typically associate with his groundbreaking scientific achievements.
Exactly. It serves as a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can have areas of thought or interest that might seem irrational or, unconventional to us.
And a contemporary figure like Elon Musk also seems to fit this pattern.
Definitely comes to mind.
His visionary drive and innovative genius are undeniably intertwined with his often unconventional methods and a seemingly deliberate disregard for established norms.
Which causes friction.
Right. Which can be both a source of his success and, obviously, a point of controversy.
It raises that question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We often deeply admire the outcomes of truly unique thinking, the breakthroughs, the innovations.
Yeah, we want the good stuff.
But we might be far less inclined to embrace the full spectrum of personality traits that often accompany such extraordinary minds.
Precisely. We often desire the magic without necessarily wanting to deal with the perceived mess that can sometimes come with it.
Okay, another really compelling area that our sources explore is the illusion of certainty.
Yeah.
That strong human desire to know what's coming next, and the powerful appeal of stories, especially when we're confronted with an uncertain future.
This speaks to a very fundamental human need, doesn't it? To have a sense of predictability, even if that certainty ultimately proves to be inaccurate.
Right.
The anecdote about the raid on Osama bin Laden, even with meticulous planning, the mission's success was viewed as essentially a 50-50 proposition.
Wow, 50-50.
Yeah. And the SEAL team members felt their own chances of survival were the same, regardless of whether bin Laden was actually there or not. It just underscores the immense uncertainty often underlying even seemingly decisive events.
And in a world with nearly 8 billion people, even events that seem incredibly rare on an individual level are bound to occur with some frequency,
Statistically, yeah.
which can contribute to this underlying feeling of constant volatility. Our source draws a contrast between the more localized news of the past and today's globally interconnected and often quite pessimistic news cycle. It's not necessarily that the world is objectively worse in every metric.
Although it can feel that way sometimes.
It can feel that way. But we are certainly far more aware of the myriad problems happening across the globe.
That constant influx of often negative information can definitely contribute to a perception of a more fractured and unstable world. And Charlie Munger's concept of the doubt avoidance tendency.
What's that?
It helps explain why we have such a strong craving for certainty. It's inherently uncomfortable for most people to just sit with ambiguity and uncertainty. We want answers.
Which naturally leads into the power of stories.
Ah, yes. Narrative.
Our sources consistently highlight that compelling narratives often hold far more sway over human minds than cold, hard facts alone,
No way.
especially when it comes to persuasion and connection.
Totally. Think about Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech.
So powerful.
Its enduring power wasn't solely based on the factual injustices he outlined, right? It was in the powerful story he told of a more just and equitable future.
The vision.
Exactly. Including that iconic impromptu section prompted by Mahalia Jackson yelling, "Tell them about the tree, Martin."
Wow, I didn't know that part was impromptu.
Yeah, that spontaneous moment, fueled by deep emotion and connection with the audience, became one of the most memorable and impactful parts of the entire speech.
And you see this elsewhere too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The widespread success of Ken Burns' documentaries.
Love his work.
They prioritize compelling storytelling and emotional resonance even when presenting historical facts. That's why they connect with so many people.
Even Yuval Noah Harari, the author of *Sapiens*, has acknowledged that much of the information in his book was already known.
Right.
But it was the captivating and accessible way he wove it into a grand narrative of human history that made it such a phenomenal bestseller.
It's the story. And Stephen Hawking famously quipped that every equation included in a popular science book would have its sales.
Huh. People prefer words.
People connect with stories on a fundamental level.
Absolutely. And this extends to areas beyond just historical or cultural narratives. Consider something like the stock market.
Okay.
The valuation of a company isn't solely based on its current financial metrics, is it?
No, not at all. It's also heavily influenced by the story that investors tell themselves about its future potential.
The narrative around the company.
Exactly. And its place in the broader economic narrative. Understanding those underlying stories is often crucial.
Now let's delve into how our sort of carefully constructed logical plans can sometimes go awry when they encounter the complexities of human behavior
Ah, the human factor.
and the often overriding power of incentives.
This is where we confront the reality that human behavior isn't always neatly rational or predictable.
Not like a spreadsheet.
Definitely not. As the philosopher Will Durant famously said, logic is an invention of man and may be ignored by the universe. And indeed, it often is, driven by emotions, biases, and a whole host of factors that can be difficult to quantify.
The example of the Vietnam War body count is a really stark illustration of this, isn't it?
It really is. The U.S. military focused heavily on this seemingly objective metric, believing they were winning based on the numbers.
Seemed logical.
Right. But they fundamentally misunderstood the human element, the unwavering will and determination of the opposition. You know, perhaps best captured in Ho Chi Minh's alleged quote about outlasting their enemy. "You can kill 10 of my men for every one I kill of yours, but even at those odds you will lose and I will win."
Wow. Chilling.
That over-reliance on easily measurable metrics can often blind us to the more nuanced and less quantifiable realities that ultimately determine outcomes.
Like will or morale.
Exactly. The German Ardennes offensive in World War II provides another compelling example. Allied intelligence made a seemingly logical assessment of German military capability.
Right, they looked at the resources.
And concluded that a major offensive was unlikely. They completely overlooked the desperation and perhaps irrationality that can drive decision-making in extreme circumstances.
Killer's desperation.
Precisely. And then there are incentives. Our source quotes James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, who wisely observed, "People follow incentives, not advice."
So simple, but so true.
It seems straightforward, yet it's remarkable how often we fail to fully appreciate its power.
Incentives are just incredibly potent drivers of behavior, often outweighing logic, moral considerations, or even our own stated intentions.
Absolutely. The anecdote about the pizza delivery driver who transitioned to becoming a subprime mortgage banker during the housing bubble.
Right before the crash.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates this. The sheer financial incentives at the time were so compelling that they drew people into activities that, well, with the benefit of hindsight, seem clearly unsustainable and even unethical.
The money was just too good to ignore.
It seems so. Even something like the local popularity of a figure like El Chapo in his home region
Yeah.
can be understood through the lens of incentives. He provided direct financial support and resources to the community.
Built roads, paid for festivals.
Right, fostering a sense of loyalty that transcended his criminal activities, at least for some people.
So understanding the underlying incentives at play can often help us make sense of seemingly absurd or inexplicable behaviors and outcomes.
Definitely. It reveals the fundamental motivations that drive people's actions, often in ways that pure logic alone cannot explain.
Okay, another really insightful point our sources make is about the profound and lasting impact of firsthand experience
hmm Experience as a teacher.
and how those experiences, particularly those that are difficult or traumatic, can leave indelible scars that shape our perspectives for years to come.
This idea that wounds heal but scars last is incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
Think about the contrasting security measures you might observe at the Pentagon versus an airport like Reagan National in the years following 9/11.
what's the difference?
The Pentagon, the site of a direct attack, shows relatively few overt changes from the outside, while the entire airport security experience has been fundamentally and permanently altered for everyone.
That difference really underscores how deeply impactful those kinds of events are on our collective psyche and our subsequent approach to perceived risk.
Totally. And when you consider something on the scale of World War II, the vast difference in perspective between someone who endured the brutal fighting on the Eastern Front,
Unimaginable destruction.
tens of millions perished, entire regions were devastated, comparing their experience versus someone who experienced the war in a different theater, say in the US, the difference would be immense.
And those scars last.
Indeed. The study mentioned in our source, which found that WWII survivors had an increased likelihood of conditions like diabetes and depression, as well as a decreased likelihood of marriage and overall life satisfaction in older age.
Wow.
It really highlights the long-term, often invisible consequences of such profound experiences.
Even the notably cautious mindset of college students during the Great Depression, as documented back in 1936, reflects how deeply formative those difficult economic times were.
Absolutely. And the stark contrast between the post-World War II economic boom in the United States and the severe scarcity and hardship that much of Europe still faced in 1947.
Right. Marshall Plan era.
It vividly illustrates how vastly different lived realities can lead to entirely different outlooks, priorities, and worldviews.
So maybe a lot of disagreements aren't about values, but just different experiences.
Exactly. So many debates and disagreements we encounter might not stem from fundamental differences in core values, but rather from the simple fact that we are all operating through the lens of our own unique set of experiences, which can be extraordinarily varied.
Now, let's turn our attention to the very nature of progress itself. Our sources suggest that significant positive change often occurs gradually, almost imperceptibly,
Sneaks up on you.
while negative events can unfold with remarkable speed and immediately capture our attention.
This is a really crucial observation. The dramatic decline in mortality rates from heart disease since the 1950s, a reduction of over 70%.
That's incredible.
It's an absolutely incredible achievement in public health and medicine, but because it has been a relatively slow and steady decline, averaging around, 1.5% per year,
Doesn't make headlines.
it rarely makes front-page news. It's a long-term triumph unfolding in what feels like slow motion.
It's a similar story with overall economic growth, right? An eightfold increase in real GDP per capita over the last century is staggering.
Huge.
But the gradual annual growth rate of around 3% can often feel almost invisible in our day-to-day lives. We tend to be much more focused on the immediate fluctuations, the short-term economic news.
Which stands in stark contrast to the often rapid and dramatic collapse of long-established entities like Lehman Brothers, Enron, or even the Soviet Union.
Gone in a flash, relatively speaking.
Decline, it seems, can happen with breathtaking speed. Our source uses a powerful analogy. Think of the immense complexity involved in building a human being
Miraculous, really.
versus the relative simplicity of what can cause death, often just a failure of one critical system.
And the sheer destructive power of something like the Tsar Bomba, that incredibly potent nuclear weapon,
Yeah.
further illustrates this asymmetry, the immense effort required for creation versus the relative ease with which vast destruction can be unleashed.
It's unsettling. Even something like the COVID-19 pandemic, while initially perceived as a classic black swan event, a total surprise,
Right.
can be viewed in hindsight as a confluence of several smaller, more probable risks that happen to align and amplify each other.
So not one impossible thing, but a few likely things happening together.
That's a valuable reframing. It wasn't a single completely impossible event, but rather a combination of more likely occurrences like gain-of-function research risk, global travel, initial downplaying that interacted in unexpected ways.
Okay.
And this brings us to the quote from Albert Bartlett, a renowned physicist, about humanity's fundamental inability to truly grasp the power of exponential growth.
The doubling effect.
Right. which applies perfectly to the long-term compounding effects in areas like investing. Small, consistent gains over extended periods can lead to extraordinary results, but our linear way of thinking often causes us to miss this. We underestimate compounding.
This leads us to a seemingly paradoxical idea, but one that our sources argue is actually essential for progress: the necessity of maintaining a balance between optimism and pessimism.
Seems contradictory, doesn't it?
It does. But apparently a healthy dose of both is often required for real advancement. The concept of rational optimism is key here,
Okay, what's that?
acknowledging the very real challenges and potential setbacks that exist.
The pessimism part.
Right. While still maintaining an underlying belief in the possibility of eventual improvement.
The optimism part. Got it.
Our source offers a great example: saving money with the cautious mindset of a pessimist, preparing for potential financial difficulties.
Rainy day fund.
Exactly. But investing in that saved money with the hopeful outlook of an optimist, believing in long-term economic growth.
Yeah.
It's about holding those seemingly opposing viewpoints simultaneously.
That balanced perspective is crucial for navigating the inherent uncertainties of life and the world. Even during the bleakness of the Great Depression in the United States. A surprisingly optimistic work of historical analysis titled The Epic of America became a massive bestseller. People needed that hopeful narrative then.
And consider someone like Bill Gates, known for his fierce competitive drive and unwavering confidence in Microsoft's potential.
Very optimistic.
Yet he also famously insisted on maintaining a massive cash reserve for the company, enough to survive a year with no revenue. Very pessimistic, risk-averse strategy.
That's a perfect example. Optimism about the mission, pessimism about the short-term risks.
And it connects to this interesting evolutionary principle that extreme specialization can actually lead to increased vulnerability.
Like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Sometimes a certain degree of inefficiency or diversification can be more beneficial for long-term survival and growth. Even something that might seem like wasting time can actually be valuable for fostering creativity and problem-solving, as the brilliant psychologist Amos Tversky pointed out.
Right, letting your mind wander.
A concept echoed in George Shultz's deliberate practice of scheduling dedicated thinking time. Just time to think.
These seemingly less efficient strategies, like holding cash or diversifying investments or even just thinking time, provide crucial resilience in the face of unexpected events.
So it's not always about maximizing efficiency.
Ultimately, it seems it's about finding that optimal level of hassle or inefficiency that allows us to function effectively in a complex and imperfect world.
The anecdote about the CEO who had become enraged over minor inconveniences like gate changes at the airport really highlight someone with a very low tolerance for the normal frictions of life. You need some buffer for that stuff.
You really do. You can't optimize everything away.
Finally, let's touch on the often ephemeral nature of competitive advantage.
Things don't last forever.
It seems that in so many different domains, those edges that we work so diligently to create eventually tend to erode over time due to competition and the constant forces of change.
That's a fundamental reality in many dynamic systems. Even in the natural world, you see this principle at play. Consider Cope's rule.
Cope's rule.
It describes the tendency for animal species to evolve towards larger body sizes over time, but also the counterforces that often punish excessive size. Think dinosaurs, demonstrating that even evolutionary advantages are not always permanent.
And the story of Sears is a classic example in the business world, isn't it?
Textbook case. A company that once held a seemingly unassailable competitive advantage, dominating retail in the mid-20th century.
Mail order king.
Totally. Eventually lost its way due to shifting consumer preferences and the rise of new, more agile competitors. Couldn't adapt.
It's a constant reminder that the landscape is perpetually shifting. Van Valen's Red Queen hypothesis, borrowed from Alice in Wonderland, really applies here.
The Red Queen?
Yeah, you have to keep running just to stay in the same relative position.
Okay. Makes sense.
Whether it's in business, your career, or even personal relationships, the forces of competition and change never cease.
And it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to accurately predict the long-term impact of even seemingly minor innovations.
Like the first cell phone, maybe.
Exactly. Think about the initial, rather limited perception of the phonograph, just the dictation machine, maybe? Or the original, quite narrow purpose of Facebook just for college kids.
Right.
No one at their inception could have truly foreseen their eventual transformative power on society.
We often have a tendency to underestimate the potential of future innovation, while sometimes overestimating the staying power of current advantages.
And it's frequently the seemingly insignificant things combining in unexpected ways, what are known as emergent effects,
Emergent effects.
that lead to truly transformative changes. Much like a tornado forming from the interaction of seemingly ordinary cool and warm air masses. The combination is key.
And on a related note, our sources remind us of the often hidden struggles that lie beneath the surface of visible success.
Right, what you don't see.
We so often only see the polished exterior, not the immense hard work, the self-doubt, the anxieties that are frequently involved. As James Baldwin so eloquently put it, you think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read.
Wow, that's powerful. The analogy of an iceberg is so apt here that the success we see is often just a small fraction of the total effort and challenges that lie beneath the surface.
Totally. Even someone as driven and seemingly invincible as Elon Musk has openly spoken about the immense emotional toll and personal sacrifices involved in the growth of Tesla.
Production hell phase.
Exactly. And we come back, in a way, to the power of incentives again.
Always incentive.
They can motivate people to act in ways that might seem irrational or even unethical from an outside perspective, and they can also subtly blind us to our own underlying biases and motivations.
That stark anecdote about the commercial artist who made the switch to selling crack cocaine,
Yeah, jarring example.
due to the immediate and compelling financial incentives, provides a powerful, if unsettling, illustration of this principle. The money was just faster and easier, apparently.
And ultimately, firsthand experience remains the most persuasive and deeply impactful force shaping our beliefs and behaviors,
What you live through.
especially during times of significant stress or crisis. The rapid and dramatic shifts in public opinion regarding government intervention and taxation during the Great Depression and World War II
Big shifts.
vividly illustrate just how powerfully our shared experiences can reshape our collective perspectives and priorities. What seemed unthinkable before suddenly becomes necessary.
Yeah. Experience changes everything.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, we've really explored some incredibly thought-provoking ideas today.
Definitely a lot to chew on.
We've examined the pervasive influence of the unexpected, the ever-shifting nature of satisfaction in relation to our expectations, the fascinating complexities inherent in truly unique minds, the enduring power of narrative, the often underappreciated forces of gradual change alongside the suddenness of disruption.
The slow build and the fast fall.
Right. The delicate balance between optimism and pessimism that seems necessary for progress, and the frequently obscured realities that lie behind apparent success.
And gaining an understanding of these enduring principles, these fundamental laws of life, as our source calls them, can indeed provide us with a more nuanced, resilient, and ultimately more informed perspective on the world around us.
Yeah. Helps make sense of things.
It allows us to better navigate uncertainty and to appreciate the often subtle yet powerful forces that are constantly at play.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Which of these insights resonates most deeply with your own personal experiences?
Good question.
How might you consciously apply these understandings to your own life and the decisions you'll be making moving forward? We encourage you to continue exploring these themes and to keep questioning your own assumptions.
Keep thinking.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.